401k with a side of revenge, how my ex tried to destroy my life, but I ended up cleaning out his retirement. Alright, buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. Someone told me I should share this here, and I'm here for it. It all began back when our first child was born. I was a fresh new mom, adjusting to the idea of raising a little human, but then my ex dropped a bombshell. He forced me to quit my job. He said it was for the family, that I needed to stay home, take care of the kids, and build our life around them. I didn't even have a say in the matter. It wasn't a decision I was happy with, but I trusted him, at least, I thought I did. I thought this was a partnership, that he was looking out for us. But I quickly learned that my trust had been misplaced. Giving up my career to support his was one thing, but the abuse that followed? That was something else entirely. Little did I know that my decision would end up trapping me in a marriage where my worth was reduced to nothing more than a housekeeper and caretaker. No voice. No options. I was isolated, dependent, and didn't even realize how deep the hole was until I saw him for who he really was. I couldn't make a move without him trying to control everything in my life. Everything was about him, his work, his needs. My identity had become wrapped up in his, and I felt suffocated. But somehow, I couldn't break free. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have the strength. Not yet. Fast forward a couple years, and I had 2 kids to care for. Things started getting worse. Much worse. My ex was no longer the man I thought I married. He became emotionally abusive, belittling me at every turn. Verbal insults, constant criticisms, and the silent treatment for days, it wore me down. There was no escape. No safe space. It felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells. And then, one day, I found out about the affair. I was blindsided, betrayed in the worst possible way. He'd been seeing someone else, sneaking around. Behind my back, all while pretending everything was fine at home. The lie was unbearable, but it didn't end there. The emotional abuse ramped up, and he'd twist everything I said or did. It became impossible to do anything right in his eyes. He didn't even try to hide it anymore. He was completely indifferent to how it affected the kids. Every time I tried to talk to him about his behavior, he dismissed me, or worse, turned it around on me. I was a failure. I wasn't being a good wife. The worst part? He was completely indifferent to how it affected the kids. I tried to stay calm, to focus on being there for them, but it was hard. It felt like a constant battle for my sanity. And it wasn't just emotional, the physical abuse started too. When he raised his hand against our firstborn, I knew I had to act. That was my wake-up call. The moment I realized I couldn't just wait around and hope things would change. I had to get out, and I had to get out fast. So, I made the hardest decision of my life and put him out. I didn't think twice. I had to protect my children. They deserved better than this. I didn't care what anyone thought. I wasn't about to let him hurt them anymore. I had to rebuild my life from the ground up. No family support, no daycare to get back into work, and no safety net. I was in survival mode. I had 2 kids to care for, and I was terrified. I felt lost in this overwhelming world of responsibilities. I was doing everything alone. There were days when I cried in silence, feeling the weight of everything on my shoulders, but there was no one to turn to. I couldn't let anyone see how weak I felt. It wasn't an option. Every decision I made felt like a gamble. Should I use the little money I had for groceries or for gas to take the kids to doctor's appointments? Should I try and get a job and risk my already fragile mental state, or should I continue staying home and figuring out how to get by? Every choice felt like a trap. But I knew one thing, I couldn't let him win. I had to get out of this nightmare, and I had to do it for my kids. They needed me to be strong, even when I didn't feel like it. I kept my head down and kept pushing forward, even when I didn't have a clear path. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building a future for myself and my kids. But my ex? He refused to help. Not a single penny. He told me, "The courts haven't ordered me to give you a dime," as if it were just a technicality. As if being a father didn't mean anything to him. I couldn't believe it. He was watching me drown, and he didn't care. To make matters worse, he froze my bank accounts, cutting off the little money I had. I couldn't even pay for the basics. I was left scrambling, desperate, and emotionally drained. It felt like he was trying to break me, to make me depend on him again. But I was done. I would never let him have that power over me again. When I filed for divorce, he didn't take it lightly. He assaulted me during the process, physically and emotionally. I was terrified. He wasn't just trying to break me, he was trying to break my spirit. But I wasn't going to let him control me any longer. The moment he raised his hand to me, it was over. I had enough, and I was going to make sure the court knew it. After the court ordered him to pay $2,562 a month in child and spousal support, he still refused. It wasn't just a refusal, it was a game to him. He stalled, ignored the payments, and continued to push my buttons. He wanted to break me down. He wanted to remind me who was in charge. It wasn't just about the money, it was about control. He thought that if he could control me financially, he could control me emotionally too. But what he didn't understand was that I wasn't going to play his game. The more he stalled, the more determined I became. He didn't care that I was struggling, that I was barely keeping my head above water. His refusal to pay was an act of dominance, as if showing me that he could still control the situation. He was punishing me for leaving him, for standing up for myself. He tried to break me in every way possible, financially, emotionally, and mentally. He kept playing his game, thinking I would eventually cave. But what he didn't know was that I was done with him. I was done being his punching bag, done letting him think he could control me. He dragged his feet until the garnishment finally kicked in. By the time it did, he was $6,000 behind in support, and I had to wait months just to get any help. But what he didn't count on was that I wasn't going to sit around and just take it. I had a plan, and it wasn't about waiting for him to come through. It was about getting out of this mess once and for all. I wasn't going to wait for him to pay his dues. I was going to use this as an opportunity to take back control of my life. And so, when the garnishment came through, I used that money as leverage to leave. I packed up my life, moved away, and started over. I didn't care that he was behind in payments. I didn't care about anything except getting out of his grasp. He thought he could hold me back with money, but he didn't realize that I was ready to fight for my freedom, no matter what it took. Then came the remarriage. Honestly, I didn't expect it to be such a game changer, but it was. A year after the divorce, I remarried. The idea of remarrying was to start fresh, build a new life with someone who respected me and wanted to support me, something I hadn't had before. But I made a critical mistake. I checked the court documents and saw something that made me feel safe, a little box that said spousal support would stop upon remarriage if that box was checked. But it wasn't checked. So, I thought I was good. I figured that meant I could go on with my life without the financial anchor of his support dragging me down. I was moving on. I was happy. I had a new life, new love, new possibilities. But then, like a lightning bolt, he hit me with something unexpected. Instead of letting me move on, he turned into a full-blown monster when he found out about my remarriage. Suddenly, he was pissed about the spousal support he had paid for that first year, the same support I had taken instead of going after his retirement. His attitude shifted from bitter to downright vindictive. He felt betrayed by me taking what was mine, and his ego couldn't take it. He didn't care about the kids anymore. It wasn't about them. It was about controlling me and getting revenge for what I had done. And that's when everything turned south. His rage was unmatched, and I knew I had to be careful. But I wasn't scared anymore. He could try whatever he wanted, but I wasn't going down without a fight. He filed for sole custody of our kids in 2017. Just out of nowhere. Why? Because he found out I remarried and had taken that spousal support. He was furious that I had moved on without him and that I wasn't suffering in the way he had imagined. To him, the idea of me being happy with someone else was an unbearable blow to his fragile ego. But it wasn't just about his pride. When he realized I could go after his 401k, that's when the real drama began. The thought of me securing a future without him, without needing him for anything, well, that drove him crazy. He couldn't handle the idea of me getting ahead while he stayed stagnant. He was furious. He didn't just want to punish me for moving on, he wanted to control me, force me into a corner where I had no choices left. He wanted to make me regret ever leaving, but most importantly, he wanted to make sure he could still dictate my life. So, I told him the truth. I gave him the option. Either let me keep the $12,000 in spousal support, or I'd file for the 401k. I laid it all out, made him a deal he couldn't refuse. But his arrogance got the best of him. Instead of letting me walk away with the $12,000 and keeping the peace, he chose the worst possible option. He demanded that I repay every cent. His pride was his undoing. He wanted to win, and I was determined that he wouldn't. The judge ordered me to pay it back. But here's the thing, the child support got bumped up, and that repayment came out of it. So, instead of losing everything, I ended up with an extra $20 a month. It wasn't much, but it felt like winning. He thought he had trapped me, but all he did was make my life a little easier. Oh, and there was one more thing, he dropped his custody bid. For 2 extra weeks of summer visitation. Can you believe it? He was so desperate for control, so obsessed with making me feel inferior, that he was willing to give up a fight for his kids just to make a point. It's laughable now, but back then, it felt like the final victory I needed. He thought I would back down, that I would let him win. But no, not anymore. This was my life, and he wasn't going to take any more from me. But even that wasn't the end of it. I was in for even more drama. He started dragging his feet when it came to splitting his 401k. He played every stall tactic in the book, and the court couldn't stand it. For 4 years, he refused to cooperate, tried to make me give up, and delayed the process at every turn. He was underestimating how badly I wanted what was mine. He wasn't just delaying the 401k split, he was trying to drag me through the mud emotionally. He thought that if he kept stalling, I'd get tired, lose my resolve. But he was wrong. Every time he put off cooperating, I pushed harder. I wasn't going to let him win. The court finally had enough. They sanctioned him. They ordered him to pay me $600 a month on top of child support for a year. Oh, and they slapped him with contempt charges. Karma is a bitch, and my ex was about to get a huge taste of it. It wasn't just about the money, it was about him getting what he deserved. He had taken everything from me, held me back at every turn, and now it was my turn to make sure he knew what it felt like to be powerless. He wanted to control me, but the tables had turned, and he didn't like it one bit. And then came the final punch. In January 2021, he proposed to his girlfriend. I'm sure he thought this was his redemption story. He was moving on with his life, and everything was looking up for him. He had this new future with someone else, someone he could control. But what he didn't know was that in May of the same year, I was going to get the disbursement from his 401k. I had no idea it would be this much, 4 times the amount of the spousal support overpayment. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I had no idea it would be this much money. In my head, I thought it would be around $12,000, which is why I decided to take the spousal support instead of filing for his retirement account. I was playing a simple game, one where I gave him the option to do the right thing, but he chose wrong. And that was his downfall. Had he let me keep that spousal support and not made me fight for the 401k, he would have had a fraction of what he lost. But he didn't. And in the end, I walked away with 4 times the amount I expected, more than enough to secure my future and make sure my kids were taken care of. I didn't just get my revenge, I got my freedom. When his fiancée found out about the payout, she started emailing me. She told me I was to blame for him not marrying her, that I had cleaned out his retirement account and ruined everything for them. She told me I stole his money. I didn't even know what to say at first. But then I laughed. I told her I gave him a choice. He could have let me keep the spousal support or let me file for the 401k. He chose the latter, and I played the hand I was dealt. I didn't owe her any explanation. If she wanted him to protect his assets, she could have gotten him to sign a prenup. I wasn't responsible for her bad decisions, and she was the one who had to live with the consequences. Her response? She said I robbed him. I didn't rob him. I just outplayed him at his own game. But that's the thing, he thought he could control me forever. He thought I would always be dependent on him, always be weak in his eyes. But when you push a person too far, when you try to break them over and over, eventually they find their strength. And when I found mine, there was no going back. In the end, my ex tried to ruin my life. He tried to keep me financially dependent on him, control my every move, and manipulate me into submission. But I fought back. I fought for my future and for the future of my kids. And in the end, it cost him everything. His 401k. His pride. His future marriage. He played a game, and he lost. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And I was the one walking away with the biggest prize of all, my independence, my dignity, and a future on my own terms. So, to any woman out there who thinks she's stuck, who thinks she can't get out of a bad situation, trust me, you can. You have the power. And when you find that strength, nothing can stop you. Never let anyone think they can control you.